Shabbat Shalom. I welcome you again virtually to Congregation Micah's Bagels, Love and Torah. I think you need to grab your own bagel. The love we will feel on the internet, and the Torah I share with you through various insights, drashot, we say, a drash, and interpretations from ancient times to modern times to sermonettes. We take this time and fill it with some sacred words, and to do that we like to bless. So we say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Again, thank you for joining us virtually as we soak in and spend some time busying ourselves with sacred texts. By way of introduction, a story. Rabbi Harold Schulweis used to conclude the evening with his daughter by tucking her into bed, and one night, frequently, would have conversations about prayer. Now, try having two parents who are rabbis. Ask my kids. Anyway, in these conversations, one time when she was, 6 or 7, apparently, she sang the Shema, God's oneness, and then she said, "Where is God?" Now, Rabbi Schulweis was quick on his feet, and he adapted a game he knew that was taught to him by a religious educator, and he said, "Touch my nose," and she touched his nose, and he said, "Touch my arms," and she touched his arm. He said, "Touch my chest," she touched his chest. He said, "Now touch my love." Ooh. She stopped for a moment, and she reached out to touch his chest and arms, and he pointed out that you already touched those things. And he said, "Touch my love," and she couldn't. She smiled. Just as we can't touch or see God's love, we know it's there. And the same is true about God itself, right? Even though we can't see or point or touch God, God's there. That's from a book for those who can't believe. And it makes me think that in this week's Torah portion, Be'et Kanan, Moses continues his farewell speech to the Israelites. But in particular, we find some of the most well-known words in all of Jewish liturgy, in our prayers, in our service. We find Ve'ahavta, right? Two themes are apparent in these words. First, that God is one, and that second, that we are commanded. We are commanded to love Adonai our God with all our heart, right? With all our soul, with all our being. Rabbi Schulweis's daughter may ask, how do we love God with all our heart? An early rabbinic tradition would answer her, and that it would say that we love God through our mitzvot, through our deeds, the way we act in the world. And Gunther Plaut, he's the Reform guy, would add, it is our attention to the mitzvot that will make us, as well as others, aware of the one in whose name they are performed. And the greater our devotion and concentration upon the mitzvah and its giver, the more likely we will be to enter into the context of pure love. You see, each mitzvah, done in the right spirit, in the act of loving God and trying to be closer, it can be done anywhere, any time, everywhere really. Wherever an opportunity for a good deed exists, it's not exclusively consequential of the spiritual. The more godly, though, acts we perform in the world, the more we can truly show our love for God. Because when we perform godly acts, we also may feel God's presence, and the world might feel our love. So, just by way of introduction, a little taste of Torah. I want to thank you again for joining us, and we'll be right back with an overview. Where might one find God? It's an eye for mystery is what it takes. So Rabbi Wolpe writes, Jewish philosophers differ in their answer to this question. Some speak about finding God first in the eyes of another person. Some speak of finding God first in the mitzvot. Some speak of the wonders of nature, the sun sustaining the sky pink at a sunset, or the first buds of spring. According to Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, faith comes before the wonders of nature, even before relationships with other human beings. Faith begins in what Heschel calls radical amazement, to sheer wonder that the world exists. Why is there anything rather than nothing? Who summoned this marvel into the world? The world will not perish, writes the biologist J.B.S. Haldane, for want of wonders, but for want of wonder. Heschel enables us to understand that each moment invites amazement. Once we get the capacity for amazement, the world is a procession of marvelous mysteries ready to unfold. The novelist and poet Thomas Hardy might have been aspiring to the worldview of Heschel in his poem Afterwards. If, when hearing that I have been stilled at last, they stand at the door, watching the full-starred heavens that winter sees, would this thought rise on those who will meet my face no more? He was one who had an eye for such mysteries. So the mystery of Torah, the mystery of God, the mystery of the pandemic, the mystery of the future, the mystery of, I don't know, the Shema. Maybe we should get into that. Yeah, we'll do that next, because it's in this week's Torah portion. Can we decipher the meaning of the Shema? So, of the 4,875 verses in the Torah, one stands out as the code of faith for us Jews. Since the time of the temple in Jerusalem, the words Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal alone, have been recited twice daily by pious Jews. They are among the first words taught to a young child, and the last words recited at the time of death. Jewish martyrs have profoundly pronounced them against forces of tyranny, and through the centuries they have constituted the most universally known Hebrew phrase in the Jewish tradition. In evaluating the words of the Shema, Rabbi Joseph Hertz, once the chief rabbi of the British Empire, writes, "Throughout the entire realm of literature, there is probably no utterance to be found that can be compared in its intellectual and spiritual force or in the influence it exerted upon the whole thinking and feeling of civilized humanity than the 6 words that have become the battle cry of the Jewish people for more than 25 centuries. Rabbi Gunther Plaut characterizes the Shema as, quote, a precious gem, a diamond set into a crown of faith and proven true, enduring in human history. Despite these testimonials to the importance of the Shema, commentators of Torah raise questions about its meaning, and as with other portions of the Torah, they differ in their interpretations. Rabbi Pinchas ben Chana claims that the Israelites first said the Shema as they were standing at Sinai. The early rabbis teach that it is an affirmation of the Jewish people's partnership with God. Other rabbis argue that the phrase Adonai our God means God is our source. In other words, human beings derive from God and are made in the image of God. Rashi offers a different approach. Living in 11th century France in a world of conflicting faiths, he hopes that in a time human thought will evolve to the point where all human beings embrace one notion of God and achieve peace. And for him, the words "Hear, O Israel," Adonai is our God, Adonai is one, translates to "Hear, O Israel, Adonai, whom we recognize as our God, will one day be accepted by all people as one. And their belief in one God will unite us as one human family." In this view, Rashi sort of reflects the perspective of the Elenu Prayer, if you think of it, recited at the conclusion, right, of our Jewish worship services. In the words of Deuteronomy 4:39, the Elenu declares, Know therefore this day and keep in mind that Adonai alone is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is none else. Ein od. Elenu then concludes with the hope that all evil will be ended and that the world will be perfected under God's rule, and that all human beings will acknowledge that God is one. It may or may not surprise you, there are congregations, even locally, that drop the Elenu, that often won't recite it. You're asking why? Because of this need to, and I get it, make everyone worship our God. In the Gates of Prayer book, a more modern version of the Elenu sort of popped up. When we say modern already, that's an old book. It sort of mirrors Rashi's interpretation. It's, eternal God, we face the morrow with hope made stronger by the vision of your kingdom, a world where poverty and war are banished, where injustice and hate are gone. Teach us more and more to share the pain of others, to heed your call for justice, to pursue the blessings of peace. Sort of help us, God, bring a victory over evil to arrive at one day where all the world will be one. So, for Maimonides, the Shema is not a statement of hope that all human beings will eventually agree that God is one. No, it's a theological declaration that the cause of all existence is one. In his 13 Principles of Faith, Maimonides declares that God's unity is central and unique, that God creates all that is and continues to create all that will be, and that God has no body or form. In other writings, he holds that God's power may not be accompanied or compared to any other power known to human beings. God is not subject to physical limitations or definitions, and God's power is endless. So the Shema, says Maimonides, affirms the unity of all that exists and will exist. God's power embraces everything. It is the primary cause, uniting the countless stars of the cosmos. It is the green globe of Earth with its complex web of life. It is the yesterday, tomorrow, today. It is the declaration of the Shema, in which the Jews acknowledge that God is not mortal, but limited by human frailties, not a symbolic, reducible to stone, wood, or artistic images. That's why we don't make images. God, Maimonides argues, is the one power that creates all that is. Nachmanides sees in the words of the Shema a very personal statement by Moses. He points out that in most other cases where Moses uses the words, "Hear, O Israel," he follows them with Adonai, your God, not with Adonai, our God. Why, asks Maimonides, does Moses in this particular situation choose to say our God? And then he speculates that Moses is concerned with appearances. God has liberated the people from slavery. He's provided for their needs in the desert. He's given them the 10 Commandments. And now, in reminding the people of all God has done, that Moses doesn't want to exclude himself. In declaring God's unity with words of the Shema, he makes it clear that he has included himself as a witness to God's goodness and to God's power. Nachmanides bases his interpretation on the actual Torah text. In the Torah text, the last letter, Ayin, of the first word of the Shema, and the last letter, Dalet, of the last word, are enlarged in the scrolls. Combine the letters and they spell aid, which means witness. In reciting the Shema, Jews bear witness to God's unity and God's power. All these commentaries are being made on, Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, where we find the Shema. Rabbi Abraham Samuel Benjamin Sofer, a 19th century Hungarian interpreter, also calls attention to the way in which the Shema is worded. The verse, says Sofer, could have been written, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God and is one." Instead, the word Adonai appears twice. Why? Sofer speculates that Moses meant to teach that all human experience comes from God. What we know is good and evil, our moments of joy and sadness, all our successes and disappointments, and all our good or bad fortune. All are derived from the same source. At times, Sofer explains, there's a tendency to believe, as did many other early religious traditions, that there are gods for good and gods for evil. Contradicting this assumption, Moses tells the people, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai our God provides all the goodness we experience, and Adonai our God is the author of all the harsh judgments we endure. Adonai is one." Contemporary commentator Rabbi Shlomo Riskin holds a view close to Sofer's. Carefully analyzing the Hebrew words Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, he notes that the two words are used for God. The first is Adonai, the second is Eloheinu. Early Jewish tradition, says Riskin, associates God's qualities of mercy and love with the word Adonai and God's qualities of judgment with Elohim. Eloheinu means our God. Riskin maintains that when Moses first spoke the words of the Shema, he meant to clarify a significant problem faced by the Israelites and by all people as well. The problem of understanding God's unity and the way God works in our lives and in the universe. When things go smoothly, and Riskin writes, when one feels a warm glow of love, success, and good health, one naturally attributes this to the good, compassionate nature of God, Adonai. But when sudden tragedy strikes, the sudden death of a loved one, national calamities, an earthquake, a pandemic, you name it, one feels the awesome and inexplicable power of God, Elohim. The Holy Zohar teaches that this seeming split in God's character is a result of our imperfect vision. If we could see more clearly, we'd understand that everything God does is done for the good of humanity. Perhaps we can't always perceive it, but how can an infinite creature be expected to fathom the infinite will? The message of the Shema, Riskin adds, is that if our eyes and ears were truly opened, we would comprehend that everything in the world, both the things we think of as being clearly good and the things that frighten us with their might, emerges from a compassionate and loving God. In other words, Adonai is one. Within Jewish tradition, Riskin concludes, we teach that just as we praise God for the good, so we must praise God for the evil. If we truly understand the Zohar teaches, then we will understand that there is not much difference between them. So I find these commentaries and I share them with you. Can we ever really believe there's no evil? That's the message of the Shema. Rabbi Leo Beck counters, right? He's a German Jew who lived through the Holocaust years, and he posed this significant question. The Jewish spirit has always sought to grasp the oneness of all reality, he writes. All reality, whether unfolding itself in one sphere or in the other, express one great unity to this Jewish spirit. Only the one God exists, and therefore there's only one order, no matter how manifold its appearances, how contradictory its representations. Within every living thing, therefore, there exists an inner reality, unique, one, concealed, unfathomable, infinite, eternal. That is the foundation. Everything proceeds from the one God. Everything returns to the one God. So here's the deal. Beck's view seems to differ from Riskin's. It's not that there's no evil or suffering. Quite contrary. The suffering of human beings and the evil they experience is real, and it's from God. Suffering becomes a test of human power to overcome affliction, says Beck. He concludes, the wisdom of Judaism, its very history so devised it, is that it sees life as a task imposed upon human beings by God. Suffering is a part of the task. Every creature individually experiences it. And through suffering, human beings experience those conflicts that give tragic significance to their will to fulfillment. In other words, not only is evil real, but in the battle against it, human beings, they test their strength. And in reciting the Shema, we sort of force our energy toward resolving conflicts, towards transforming them back into harmony. So, while Beck does not deny the reality of evil, his solution argues that God, who is all-powerful and all-knowing, actually causes evil too, so that human beings will be tested to triumph over it. A modern Jewish philosopher, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, he don't like that. So he points out that if we say that God is responsible for evil, then we must accept that God brought on all the atrocities of history, that God is responsible for the earthquakes and the famines and the floods and the pandemics. And such a conclusion, he would argue, makes God into like a monster. Instead, Rabbi Kaplan believes that we can resolve this difficult problem by assuming that God's omnipotence, this all-powerfulness they all speak of, is not an actually realized fact at any point of time, but a potential fact. If we take it into consideration that God is eternal, right, exists forever, then it's possible to understand that the evil that now mars the cosmos could be eliminated by human beings who, as God's creation, are seeking to reduce the amount of evil in the world, or so we thought. Evil, therefore, is not, as Beck says, deliberately and knowingly placed by God in our lives or in the universe as a test for human beings, but rather it represents an obstacle to the good that God is seeking for us to achieve. And Kaplan clarifies his point even further by answering this question. Why did God make polio? Great question to ask now, right? Why did God make the coronavirus? And he writes, God didn't make polio. God did not make the coronavirus. God is always helping us human beings to make this a better world. But the world cannot at once become the kind of world God would like it to be. When human beings make use of the intelligence God gives them, they learn more and more the laws of health, by which all kinds of illness can be prevented or cured. And in this way, concludes Kaplan, human beings help eliminate the, quote, evil that now mars the cosmos, end quote. For Mordecai Kaplan, the Shema, it's an expression of the special partnership between God and the Jewish people. He was a peoplehood God. And this partnership exists in the battle against suffering and in the triumph of good over evil. Let's talk about Rabbi David Hartman for a minute. I'm going to do a little study at the Hartman Institute. In fact, that is where I am currently in July. I mean, virtually at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. I've studied there before, and its founder, Rabbi David Hartman, speaks about the Shema as an expression of the partnership between the Jewish people and God. He writes, in reciting the Shema, we hear God addressing the community. The emphasis, so to speak, is, hear, O Israel, study, reflect, and be attentive to the revelatory message of Torah. It is the moment of commitment of the community to God and to God's Torah. In the Shema, one captures the felt immediacy of the revelatory moment of Sinai. That's why we close our eyes. God invites the community to enter into that covenant. Hartman, his explanation sort of places Moses in the position of using words, the words of the Shema, to remind the people of their experience with God at Mount Sinai. That's where they received the Ten Commandments. And since that time, Jews recall standing at Sinai when they recite Moses' words. So in saying the Shema, they were supposed to say twice a day, we re-enter the covenant of ritual and pledge ourselves to this ethical being we call God, who commands us to do certain acts, to be a certain way in the world. Rabbi Jacob ben Ashkenazi of Yanof compares reciting the Shema to receiving a cherished love letter. When you say the Shema, he writes, it should be as if you are reading a letter from the king, which was written to you only today and which you cherish. You listen to each and every word. You should pay careful attention to each and every word of the Shema. Look, throughout the centuries, Jews have recited the Shema as the most important expression of our faith. And we've regarded these words as love letters. And clearly, we've also argued over the mere meanings and tried to decipher their messages as if these words contain clues to understanding our most important relationships. Today, those explorations, those debates, they continue. And the declaration of our Jewish faith remains a source of inspiration and challenge. In conclusion, I want to just tell a short story about the Shema. If you know, and I've read the text carefully after that Deuteronomy 6 we go right into Ve'ahavta. So when we sing Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, there's that other Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Me'olam Va'ed. Blessed is God's glorious kingdom now and forever, we could say. But that's not in the Torah. And it's said a little softer, ritually, you'll notice. So what's going on there? This is the Midrash they tell. When Joseph was on his deathbed, he called all of his children to be with him. When Jacob was on his deathbed, he called all of his children to be with him, and Joseph, being one of those children, was there. And he said, listen, I'm old, and my time has come, and I'm going to die, and I'm afraid. And that's the point where Joseph steps forward to Jacob, his father, and says, Jacob, you don't have anything to be afraid of. You wrestled with an angel. God knows you. God will remember you. God will take care of you. So Jacob says, to all of his children, he says, I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid for you. See, because I know of this special place called the land of Israel, and you live now in Egypt. And I'm worried you'll forget about the one true God and our Jewish traditions and our culture and our path. And it's at that point that Joseph steps forward and he says, Shema Yisrael. Listen, Jacob, Israel. Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. There's one God in heaven and earth. And in a softer voice, right before he passes, the two lines we're supposed to say as we pass. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed be the name of that God now and forever. So I want to back up a little bit and look at Deuteronomy 5, verses 2 and 3. I want you to know in the background that I have Deuteronomy 29, 13, and 14. So what do those sound like? I'll read them in English. Deuteronomy 5, 2 through 3 says, God made a covenant with us in Horeb. God made this covenant not only with our ancestors, but with us, even us, who are all of us here alive this day. And this day, let them not be considered obsolete in the eyes of later generations, but rather as new one which everyone welcomes. That's according to Rashi. Neither with you only do I make this covenant I mentioned, and this oath, but with those who stand with us here this day before your God, and also those who are not here this day. That's the Deuteronomy 29, 13, and 14. So, should sound familiar as high holiday stuff, which is coming. Peshat, Pardes, going to Peshat first. Going to get to paradise, got to start with the simple meaning. The Torah is not given exclusively to one particular generation. That's the Peshat. It's given to all generations. In what sense do you feel to be a part of the covenant? As one who was not there that day, in what way do you feel commanded? Remez, paradise, the resh, looking for the clue. Remez means clue. Can a person not be obligated to a covenant with which he or she has no real dealings? I mean, how can your ancestors, our ancestors, obligate us to something? I mean, anything. Does that obligation allow for new understandings in our time? And can we reinterpret the contract? The contract can be reinterpreted, I think. So, here's the drash. Torah uses the pardes, getting to paradise, you need that drash, that interpretation. Torah uses the word us 4 times in the passage. Why the emphasis on us? What is the communal nature of our obligation? Do we feel included in the us, whether it's the Jewish community or the Nashville community or the Tennessee community or the United States community? How do we define us, right? And what shall we do with conflicting definitions? Okay, what's the sod? What's the secret meaning? We can only guess. Here's what I found. This day is today. Today, this very moment, both when I'm recording this and when I'm watching it. So it's actually 2 moments, or when you're watching it, right? So this very moment really refers to every moment in which we stand in covenant with God. So this day, today, this very moment, we are in the presence of God. And Judaism is not only about history, it's about eternity. And it's not about what happened in the past only, but about what's going to occur in your immediate present. What does it mean to be you in the presence of God at any given moment? And what is your obligation at any given moment? A student once asked the virtual Rebbe, it is said of the Kotzker Rebbe that the most important thing was the very thing he was doing at that moment. But what if he was doing something unimportant? And the virtual Rebbe answers, well, when you realize that it's God that gives you each moment, it's task you realize that there's nothing that is unimportant. All right. Just warming up still. I got a story. I want to tell you the story because it applies to the text. And this is how the story goes. Okay. In our Torah portion, at Hanan, we are presented with one of the very famous scenes in the Torah, in all of Jewish history, really. Moses is standing on the top of a mountain, on the eastern side of the Jordan. And he's told to look to the west and to the north and to the south and to the east to view the land that he has dreamed of, to glimpse at the land for only the briefest of moments. A promised land, but now promised to someone else. Because God gave that privilege, that promise of actually entering the land, of enjoying the land, to his disciple, to Joshua. So let's just picture the scene, right? Moses drops to a knee. Va'et Hanan el Adonai. He's praying to God. He says, Adonai Elohim, you have only just begun to show your servant your greatness, your strong hand. Moses is buttering God up a little, It's partly how prayer works. Mi el bashamayim ba'aretz. What power is there in the heavens and the earth that can compare to your deeds, to your amazing acts? God, please let me cross into the land, the good one that's on the other side of the Jordan River. Please. The Torah tells us that God withheld this wish from Moses. Because you believed in me not, it reads earlier in another story in the book of Numbers, at the waters of Meribah. What the Torah does not tell is that Moses was scheduled to die 10 times in the wilderness already at the end of the 40 years, as Moses stood on Mount Nebo, as Moses gazed at the promised land in the distance. He argued his case, and it went like this. Moses said, you called me as your servant, and I served. Let me sneak into the land alone. I'll take the back door. No one has to know. And God said no. Moses said, let me enter for 2-3 years tops, then I'll die. God said no. Moses said, let someone carry my bones into the land after I'm dead, like they did for Joseph? And God said no. Moses said, Adam disobeyed you, and you forgave him. And God said, no. No, I have resolved that you shall not go there. So Moses, being a great prophet, went to the earth. O Mother Earth, he said, please speak to God for me. Perhaps then God will have pity on me and allow me to enter your beautiful land. And the earth replied, I have my own troubles. You know of global warming. Dust you are, until dust you shall return. We're all in the same boat. I grow old and pass away too. So Moses went to the heavens. He didn't give up. He went to the sun. He went to the moon. He went to the stars, to the planets. He went to the hills, to the mountains. He went back to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai told him, I'm still sore from all the fire and smoke during your last visit. He went to the rivers, to the deserts. He went to the great sea, who told him that she'd been beaten up enough by the parted waters, Moses recalled all the wonderful things he had done in his youth. In those days, I was the king of the world, he thought to himself, and now I am begging for my life. He started to cry. The angels came and they snatched Moses' tears and words so that God wouldn't hear him. And our sages tell us that God, loved Moses like a mother. She always knew something was wrong and troubling him. So God came back to Moses and said, don't be afraid. It wasn't written in the Torah that you should enter the land, which Moses, of course, knew because he had done all the writing. It was decreed even before I created the world. And yours is not to ask why. It just is. And Moses said, I'm their leader, and I earned it. And God said, it's time for Joshua to take over. So Moses spent his last days on a mountaintop, gazing into the promised land from a distance, only partly resigned to the fate that had been apportioned him, thinking, should have been me. So in the book Torah from Music City, if you want to follow along, I was going to share my written piece on Ve'echanan, Prayers for a Soulful Transmission. Begins with a quote by Deuteronomy 4:9. Take care of yourself and guard your soul carefully. That's what my grandmother used to advise. May she rest in peace. Be careful, she used to say, about everything I was going to do. This is Esther Feldman, Zichronah Levracha. Her memory should bless us all. She offers good and timeless advice. Be full of care. Is it a wonder her grandson became a rabbi? We Jews are taught to care for one another and the world in which we live. We learn this from the Torah, the compass we use to navigate the challenges of life and the resources to fortify it. In Parashat Ve'echanan, God instructs us through Moses to take care of ourselves, specifically our spiritual lives. We care for our bodies and our minds, so too must we safeguard our souls. Without our souls, our bodies would be like laptop computers without any software, or light bulbs without any electricity. It's our souls that drive our search for meaning and purpose. And every time we make a mistake in life, our souls are the part of us that asks, what did I learn from this? Judaism teaches that the body and soul are separate, yet indivisible partners in human life. And together, they act as one God-given tool for doing sacred work in the world. They both require protection, care, and respect, and both are holy. Thus, our early morning prayers thank God for the miracles that our bodies are our souls. The literature of the Talmudic period provides us a variety of images of body and soul in harmony. Just as the Holy One of Blessing fills the world, so does the soul and the Shema fill the body. Just as the Holy One of Blessing sees but cannot be seen, so the soul sees but cannot be seen. Just as the Holy One of Blessing is pure, so is the soul pure. It's from Berachot 10a. Like in many other times in the Torah, the Bible instructs us to do something, to guard our souls, but not how. The verse from Deuteronomy above continues, lest you forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, so that they do not fade from your heart and from your mind as long as you live. Make them known to your children and to your children's children. Deuteronomy 9:4. The text does not say explicitly what to do, but it does provide for us general direction, reminding us not to forget. The Torah teaches us to guard our souls through memory. It asks that we recall what we did, and we make our experiences known to our children and our children's children. In the Torah, Moses is pressing upon the children of Israel to remember not only the commandments, but also the entire spectacle of the Sinai experience, the thunder and the lightning, the splendor and the magnificence. That was visible not merely to a select elite, but to millions of people. Maimonides points out that should anyone cast doubt upon the source of Torah, the entire nation could stand to testify what they had seen. It was an experience that Jews are bidden to share with their posterity generation after generation. Now, most of us reading this book today know of the experience because our parents and grandparents have succeeded in transmitting it to us. So what are the things that you have seen with your own eyes? What values and commitments and rituals and ethics are important to you? What have you done to ensure that your children and grandchildren uphold them. This is the same portion of the Torah, that contains the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, both of which remind us that part of guarding our souls is perpetuating our passions. And those of us who are passionate about Torah learn from this portion the value of teaching our children to nourish their own souls, as it helps provide them with a sense of life's purpose and meaning. If we succeed in doing this, then the values we uphold, the commitments we fight for, will find their way into being the spiritual passions that will make their lives worthwhile too. We Jews believe in the eternality of the soul, and this means that we hope and pray that our souls live on after we die, but are humbly not sure how. My grandmother taught me to care for myself and for others. My tradition teaches us all to live forever, and to do that we must follow the ways of Torah. It's a powerful thing to remember what we've seen, heard, and experienced, and then to testify to what we witnessed by sharing it with our descendants. When it comes to the recognition that to possess a Jewish soul is to learn to live with dreams, visions, and hopes bigger than our own capacities and broader than the span of our own years. And so rather than conceive of our lives as unresolved or unfulfilled, the Torah is telling us that to live forever, we should place the dreams that our souls have, the dreams that our people have, into the hearts and the minds of the next generation. We've been doing this for thousands of years, all over the world. That's still working. All right. Our Haftarah is now the first of 7, or what are called the Sheva Dakamta, the 7 Haftarot of consolation. 6 others will follow as we approach the high holidays and Rosh Hashanah. They are all from the book of Isaiah. Undoubtedly, there were many among the exiles at this time who were doubting that God could redeem them, the promises of the prophets notwithstanding. But suddenly Cyrus is about to conquer Babylon, and so, the prophet hoped, willing to let the exiles return to their native land. Isaiah preaches that God will surely proceed to make good on this divine promise. So I'm going to read from Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 26. I did want to point out a funny wordplay. I don't know if it's funny, but it's powerful. It's from the first line, famous line of the text. It's Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. These 3 words, comfort, oh comfort my people. They could read Ami as Imi. So it could be, Midrash even reads it as comfort, oh comfort Jerusalem together with me, says God. And then there's another, Rabbi Brachia, the priest, reads the words, comfort my people as comfort me, oh my people. So it's a little tricky with the Hebrew. Anyway, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar bimim tovim v'rata v'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'ndiei ha'emet v'tzedek. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 26. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Say to her that she has served her term, that her sin is pardoned, for she has received from the hand of the Eternal more than enough punishment for her sins. A voice calls, prepare a road for the Eternal through the wilderness. Clear a highway in the desert for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground shall be made level, the rough places a plain. The Eternal's presence shall be revealed. And united, all shall see it, for the Eternal One has spoken. A voice rings out, announce. Another asks, what shall I announce? All flesh is grass, and all its grace like a flower in the field. Grass withers and flowers fade when God's breath blows on them. Yes, the people are grass. Grass withers and flowers fade, but our God's word holds good forever. Ascend a high mountain. O herald of good tidings to Zion, raise your voice with power. O herald of good tidings to Jerusalem, speak up without fear. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold the eternal God coming in might, coming to rule with an outstretched arm, and bringing divine reward and recompense from on high, like a shepherd tending a flock, gathering lambs in his arms, carrying them and gently leading with the ewes. Who can measure the oceans in the palm of their hand, or gauge the skies with a span, or put all the earth's dust in a bushel, or weigh the mountains in a scale, the hills in a balance? Who can assess the mind of the eternal, or act as God's advisor? Whom has God consulted? From whom has God taken instruction to learn the path of right? Who has guided God in knowledge, teaching God the way of understanding? Why the nations are but a drop in the bucket, no more than dust on a scale to God, whose islands are but fine dust. All Lebanon could not provide fuel enough, nor all its beasts enough burnt offerings. The nations are nothing before God, who considers them as less than nothing. To whom can you imagine that compares to God? An idol? A metal worker poured it. A smith plated it with gold and forged silver links as a gift. Someone chooses mulberry, a wood that does not rot, then finds a skillful worker to make an idol that won't fall down. Do you know? Have you not heard? Were you not told from the beginning? How have you not grasped how the world began? It is God, enthroned beyond the horizon, to whom we all seem like grasshoppers. It is God, who spreads the heavens out like a curtain and stretches them like a tent to live in, bringing princes to naught, making earth's rulers as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, hardily sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in earth, when God blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these stars, the one who leads out their host by number, calling them each by name, by whose great might and vast power not one is missing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'amahan ha'omer ve'oseh ha'medaber u'mekayem shechol devarav emet v'tzedek al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nevim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ותפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה, אדוני, מקדש השבת. Thank you for joining me. Shabbat Shalom.